Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Leadership Enigma. Now, you know I'm passionate about human-centered leadership. I keep seeing that week on week. And life is full of challenge and opportunity, and perhaps the global pandemic is a great example of the fact that we are living and working in constant change. But let's be honest, our life is down to us, and we've got to become the architect of our own career. In fact, we've got to become the architect of our own happiness. So come back to me after this break. I'll be talking to a fantastic guest who spent 22 years in the financial services industry, and we'll hear all about her journey as she's become the architect of her own career.
You're listening to The Leadership Enigma, powered by Transform Performance International, a podcast for the insatiably curious to explore the power of human-centered leadership to create real momentum for positive and sustainable change. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors as we discover that success leaves clues. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Leadership to make the difference to your business, your people, and your success. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, or corporate executive, each week we dig deep into global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts, and disruptors. Now, here's your host, Adam Pacifico.
Well, here we are for another episode of the Leadership Enigma, and I'm delighted to welcome Lale Topcuoglu to this episode. And if I've said that wrong, Lale, you're going to tell me for sure. That's right. But I just want to say a massive welcome to the show. Thank you for taking part.
Oh, thanks for having me. And you did just fine with the last name.
Oh, there we go. That's a great start then for this episode. Listen, it's brilliant that you've joined me. As I said in the intro, you've had 22 years within financial services as a financial services professional, especially in the investment banking side of things. That successful career continues, but really I wanted to talk to you about your journey. Everyone's got a journey. And when we spoke a few weeks ago, I thought you had a fantastic story to tell along the lines of the intro, which was about being the architect of your own career and dreaming big. And I love that. And, you know, for myself with two teenagers who I hope go on to do anything and everything they want to do, this is a passionate subject for me. So welcome to the Leadership Enigma. Welcome to the architect of your own career and happiness. And so, Lale, tell us a little bit about your story.
Oh, where to start from?
I know.
I guess we'll start from the beginning so that, you know, everybody can get a feel for the journey.
Yeah.
So I was born and raised in Turkey. And as you know, people who know me know I'm openly gay. And one of the challenges was around actually primary school.
Yep.
When I sort of noticed something was different about me. Now at that age, you know, being different, it's hard to pinpoint, right? And you know, I went through for a number of years, I went through the whole motions of, you know, what's different about me? Why am I so different? What's wrong with me? And that comes with a whole set of demons, good or bad. And in that process, you know, one of the things that, and I know we'll touch upon this later, is I was introduced to the wonderful world of sports.
Yeah.
It was my hideout. So it's interesting. So I have two children, and my children are extreme extroverts. It's like a punishment to me, who always grew up with having very few friends. And if you think about being different, right? I mean, sometimes I look at my son and I say, you know, I'm like, I rarely had any friends when I was growing up. And he says, what was wrong with you? And I was like, probably everything. And that's what I was trying to figure out, what was wrong with me. I couldn't fit in. Like I just, you know, I wasn't a girly girl. I didn't do the whole girly things. You know, I just couldn't connect, and when you can't connect, you know, it's a fairly lonely world, I have to admit. So I connected to sports. I you know, and that's an interesting case for me, because it was literally one of those days I was just hanging out by the basketball court and this guy was playing this guy was playing and he just kicked the ball to me. And that's the first time I ever picked up a basketball, and I just taught myself how to play. And I never gave up. I would play 4 or 5 hours a day during the summer heat in Turkey. And that could be as bad as 40
I bet.
degrees
You got
Celsius.
pretty good at basketball as well, I know.
Well, not as good as, some of the professional ones, of course, but as good as I can be, right? It gave me confidence, right? So I certainly lacked a lot of confidence by just this notion that I'm different and I don't really fit in. So I really use sports to complement that, because when we were playing basketball, and I got a little bit into soccer too,
Yeah.
I was fearless. It just didn't matter who you were and what age were you, what gender you were. It just didn't matter. I would just take you on. And that confidence was so good for my mental health.
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talked a few weeks ago, you mentioned that sport was your safe harbor. And I thought that was a really interesting phrase, because there's an interesting dynamic going on here as well, because you said you lacked confidence, but when you were in a sporting environment, you were fearless and you were full of confidence and you could almost compete with anyone. So how did you reconcile that? The lack of confidence maybe by the day where you thought, I'm different, but how? And then on the sporting environment, you were fearless.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about sports is it's an equalizer, right? When
Yeah.
you're playing, it just doesn't matter. The challenge, though, where I think sports sort of resemble real life, the challenge is, and I'm going to digress a little bit, but it's getting into the game, right? So I'll give you an example. The guys in my town here, they play pre-coronavirus. They played in the outside courts
Right.
every summer, and I would run by them, and I just really wanted to join in. And it took me, almost 2 years to get onto that email list. I don't think they were malicious or anything. It just, it was just hard. You get questions like, well, did you play in college? And I'm thinking, did you ask the guys the same question if they played in college? And then you get silly things, right? Nobody wants to pick the girl. So it's always like, oh, somebody go take the girl. And then somebody always makes the joke. And it's just doesn't matter whether you're like 10 years old or you're like 45. Somebody always makes the joke. They say, oh, I mean, we can be darks or colors in the shirts, but we can also take our shirts off. And I'm thinking, I've come this far. You really think playing in my sports bra is going to deter me from playing? And I even got around to that too. You're gonna laugh at him, but I actually bought a jersey, like one of those basketball training jersey. That's you can just turn inside out, so it can be
Reversible.
a light color or a dark color, reversible. So I even covered that basis. But anyway, so finally I got in. But it resembles real life, because I think in real life too, when you think from a D&I perspective, right?
Yep.
The challenge is having somebody take a chance on you. And that is so critical, because you can have all the confidence in the world, but if nobody gives you the opportunity, you can't get to where you want to get to. And I think, so for me, it was always, yes, like I use sports, but even sports at that early on, until the game starts, you still have to have somebody take a chance on you, right? Eventually somebody picks the girl.
So do you remember when someone took a chance on you? Is there a moment that really sticks out for you where someone really said, yeah, come with me, come over here?
Yeah, it definitely did. And it helped it really propelled my career. Now, I think I would say, there's always some sort of luck that I think helps you, right? I think it's just, it's part of the equation, but I think part of it is also creating your own luck and your own situation. So somebody is willing to take a chance on you. It actually happened multiple times where, I've been given opportunities in running businesses that rhymed with my experience, but wasn't exactly identical. So they had to take a chance and say, we think you can do it. And it has been a life-changing experience, because once you're given that chance and you can prove yourself, then it builds this momentum on its own. Now, with that said, the opposite has happened too, right? Where I struggle to have people take a chance on me, because, I think in sometimes in Wall Street, the way we think about roles, it's just very boxy. You have to be A, B, C, D, and the F. And if you don't fill into these, if you don't check all the boxes,
Yeah.
sometimes you're just not given the opportunity. But alternatively, I mean, one of the other things, and I'm sure you heard of this, there's also this notion, there's the glass ceiling, but there's also the glass cliff, right? And I've taken, in my career, I've taken one very particular role where I knew it was probably going to be a glass cliff. But I took it with the notion that I'm going to try it. And if I fail at it, I'm just going to take whatever I learn out of it.
Right.
And then we'll brand it, and then we'll figure out what to do with it later on. And it will just be an experience. So I've done both, and I have no problem. I mean, failing is hard, right? I try not to take it personally, but it all comes down to that mental sort of algebra that you do, try to figure out, okay, where did I fail and how do I never, ever repeat that again?
See, that's interesting, isn't it? Because that comes back to that fearlessness again that you spoke of on the basketball court or the football pitch. And you talk about the glass cliff, where if you fail, you'll deal with the learning that comes from it, whatever that might be. And in many ways, you know, you went to Wall Street, so you had to battle the norms of Wall Street. And many people might go into law, into engineering, into finance, whatever it might be. And there are norms associated with it. So how do you break through those norms? And you said you couldn't work out what it was like to be different, but actually sometimes being different and breaking the norms and having the courage to do that allows you to authentically take your rightful place within an ecosystem. How do you do that?
Well, I think there are multiple things that are at play there. One, right. I think it depends on the firm and the firm's culture.
Yep.
You know, I think things are changing, right? Even Wall Street. I mean, I've been around for 22 years, and I know that sounds like a long time, but you know, even today at financial services, they're making big strides on a lot of the aspects of things that I was just challenged with, on representation, et cetera. So things are improving. So the firm culture matters a lot, because some cultures, they just embrace change and they just take off. So that's one of the angles. The other angle is more about, I've always thought of it as, I always looked at it like, almost like, I guess, sports.
Right.
What are the rules of the game?
Yeah.
And what are the rules that just sound silly or just unnecessary, where perhaps there's a way to nudge it a little bit? Obviously, you can't really do that in sports, but you know, when you think of the rules of the game, think of it as rules of engagement. I guess I always taken the approach that I'm gonna play with by the rules as much as I can, but with the goal that I want to get to a point where I have the seniority, where I'm given a seat at the table. Because one of the things that I think I observed, where if you don't have a seat at the table where a lot of these discussions are taking, business building, D&I, and whatever it may be, you have no idea what the conversations are. So from the outside, it's so hard to influence. And the only way you can influence that conversation from the outside is using allies, right? That's obviously one tool.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to be part of that conversation. And the only way I can be part of that conversation is play by the rules, maybe change it on the margin a little bit until I get a seat at the table. And then once I get a seat at the table, then I start poking.
Right. Look, you've been in senior leadership roles within the financial services for many years now. So you fought and you battled and you had the courage, as you say, to get a seat at the table. I want to go backwards in order to go forwards, because you had actually an early desire to lead, didn't you? I want you to tell me a little bit about when you realized you actually wanted to lead, even with, as you say, there's some of the challenges you had early on with thinking, I don't fit in and I need to work through that. You had an early desire to lead. Can you track it back to this? I want to be an influencer. I want to be a voice at the table. I want to be a catalyst for change. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, maybe it's because when I started playing basketball, I became a point guard. So I don't think it can be any more opinionated and controlling than just being a point guard.
Now, anyone who watches basketball will get that. Other people who don't watch basketball may think I don't get it. But anyway, there we go.
No, I mean, it's even to this date, I think I'm an odd duck. I always think about, I've always thought about leading. I've never dreamed about being a follower. And when I go for runs, or I'm just in my head listening to my music, and
Yeah.
it's I always daydream about what am I going to do next and how do I lead. Like, those are the things that I daydream about, as opposed to what's my day job is like, and have I made the right investment decisions. I
Hang on,
don't,
Lale. I was going to interrupt you there. Just pause 1 second. Just pull your collar away from your mic. There you
it's
there you go.
staticky.
Yeah, you can. Yeah,
There
no,
we
you
go.
can just hear it rubbing up against your mic because it's
Sorry.
very clear. No problems at all. Carry on from there, because we're talking about this early desire to lead, where that came from, and almost how that propelled you forward.
So it's hard to find a catalyst, really. I think maybe it was because being so different, I felt so lonely earlier on, and I think I just realized, and my family, I guess education has always been about treating everybody equal, being treat everybody respectfully, give
Yeah.
everybody the equal chance. I mean, that runs very strongly in my family, so I suspect that probably rubbed off on me a little bit as well. And I think just being different, when I struggled, regardless of how hard I worked, right? Like, I was never the popular person in school, right? Obviously. But and then you work really hard, and then you realize, there will be, I mean, I'll give you a simple example, right?
Okay.
There will be a thing of, there will be this, we had one thing actually very explicitly, I remember, where the class would vote on, like, electing like a class representative or whatever.
Yeah.
And you have the qualifications, but there's a zero chance you will actually get it because you're not the popular person. And I think these things just gave me ammunition to be like, okay, like, I'm just going to change it. It's not right. It's just not, I know how hard I'm working, and it just doesn't feel right. It's really hard to find a cat. Like, I don't know. I think it's an accumulation of
Gotcha.
probably the whole journey.
School is horrible, isn't it? Just generally, I'm thinking back to my own childhood now, or even who
School
knows?
is hard.
Yeah, school is hard. I think kids are just generally horrible to each other. And so, do you find that some of those challenges whilst you were at school, as you say, of thinking you were different and how do you fit in, and not the popular kid, and so many of us were not the popular kid at school. Was that a driver for you? Was that a set of memories and experiences where you thought, actually, I'm in charge here. I'll be the architect of my path, my success, and my career. Is that driving you?
I think so. I think that's a good way of putting it. I mean, I think even to this day, right? It's I did multiple things, right? So one, it's interesting. So in college, being the point guard, one of my skill sets, which I sadly probably am not even remotely as good at it anymore, but I can dribble around anybody, right? You can put everybody on me, and you wouldn't be able to get the ball. And
we're going to play basketball after COVID. You know that, right, Lale? When I'm next in New York, let me tell you, we're playing basketball. So you can teach. Oh, I don't believe that for a second.
But what I think it's so interesting, because you would see these scouts that would, I mean, I played Division 3, right? It's not like Division 1 or Division 2. And you would see these scouts that would come and watch you play, and etc. And I think what they always underestimated is when they would press me 3-on-1 or sometimes 4-on-1, it actually was a kicker for me. I wasn't intimidated. It actually was just like, okay, bring it on. I mean, it was just a challenge, which actually only made me better. And the workforce is the same too. One of my biggest motivating factors is when somebody tells me I can't do it. And my response is always like, really? I'm pretty sure I can.
Right.
And it's that getting into that, and it's all mental, right? You just have to get into your head that you can do it. And and you just keep pushing. You find other avenues, and you find allies, you find sponsors, you ask for help. You just keep forging the path. It's like a river running downstream, right? You can put a rock. I'll just find a way. I'll just go around and I'll find a different way.
This is just such a relevant topic. I mean, I don't mind if people are listening to this, is the CEO of a multinational or my teenage kids. This is relevant to everyone. This has been a tough time. You know, the pandemic's been a globally shared experience. It's been very individual for people. And let's be honest, it's been challenging in a number of ways. And finding the resilience and the mental toughness you talk about to find a way. I love that analogy of the river. It will find a way to move downhill, whatever the obstacle. And certainly you seem to have done that and risen through the ranks, got to the table to be part and parcel of the conversation. But let's also be honest. You know, you talked to me earlier about the fact that you've learned as you've gone, and you're not frightened of failure, and you've screwed things up, but you've learned from screwing things up. So tell me a little bit about, you screwed it up, but you learned the lesson and you carried the lesson forward, because failure is data. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, now that I'm older and wiser, I can reflect back to earlier years of having a leadership role, right?
Okay.
Well, one, I was lucky that, at an age of 30, my employer gave me a chance to run a fairly large business, and run a team that's set across the globe. The challenge is I kind of didn't know how to do it. And little things that I did, which all made sense at that time. Now I look back and I was just like, boy, I'm like, they were just wrong. So little things, micromanagement.
Yep.
Total team spirit killer. And when I think about why was I macromanaging, I think part of it was also, again, this goes back to mental health to a certain degree. In our business, we get under so much stress and pressure to deliver.
Yeah.
And the challenge that I found, I think at that time, I was under so much stress that I just almost withdrew to my shell. So instead of doing the opposite and delegating, I just moved on to, well, I can just do it on my own because it just needs to get done. And that's a mistake that I've learned, because it has consequences on people development, on team morale, and it actually eventually comes and bites you, right? So that's number one.
Right.
Number two was just the communication, right? In my head, I knew I was going from point A to point B, but it turns out if you never communicate to your team that you want to go from point A to point B, they kind of don't know. So for an outsider, totally. So for an outsider, they were probably looking at me like, why are we doing all this? Like, what's the purpose? So I think I was sprinting so fast, instead of seeing it like a marathon, which is just sort of the cliche. I was trying to sprint a marathon. And in that regard, I was doing shortcuts, which wasn't making a whole lot of sense. And as a result, at some points, I wasn't getting the buy-in from the team.
Right.
And that's a mistake I won't ever do again, because it created a whole host of challenges, which I probably could have avoided the entire thing. But like I said, at 30 years old, running, a business that I was privileged to be given the opportunity, but I just didn't know. And the other mistake I did, which I don't do anymore, I didn't know how to ask for help. I think I thought in the case of Wall Street, being a female is already hard. If you're gay, Black, or any of the other DNI strains, I think it's just even gets harder. And then raising my hand to be like, guys, I kind of don't know how to do this. It sounds silly, but I almost thought they would take the opportunity away from me.
Right.
So I think
this is part of the norms,
I was just
again,
afraid.
Battling the norms of thinking you can't show vulnerability, and that's exactly what you wanted or needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I think due to high stress too, there was a period. It wasn't always this rosy, right? I mean, there was a period where I talk a lot more openly now, which will probably come to a surprise to a lot of people. There was a point I was in a bad place mentally. I was angry all the time. I was short-tempered. I was yelling at my kids nonstop. It didn't take much to like spark an anger out of me. I would have like stomach cramps on Sunday because I didn't feel like going to work on Monday. I was that miserable. And eventually, I had to take a break. but I reached to a breaking point, and this is where I think I'm lucky. I have a partner in crime who basically called me out and said,
Right.
you gotta stop. You either stop or go into therapy, do something, because you're about to explode. And that was a wake-up call, and it was hard,
Wow.
right? I mean, again,
Yeah.
I think my employer never knew about it, because again, goes back to the vulnerability. I just didn't have the guts to raise my hand and say, guys, I need help, I'm dying here.
This
So
is such a
I took a
timely
break.
episode. This is such a timely episode, Lale, and I want to thank you as well. It's lovely to have such a candid and it's courageous conversation. I spoke to Shane O'Mara, who's the professor of experimental brain research, a couple of weeks ago, and I said to him, Shane, what is the consequence and the mental health consequence of the pandemic? And he said they just don't know yet. It's too soon, but there is something coming down the road that we're all going to have to deal with because of the pandemic. And I think what you're talking about there is going to resonate with so many people, and people are going to have difficult conversations with themselves. And as you say, your partner was in many ways a savior, radical candor of everyone. Everyone needs someone, right? And someone to turn around and say, "This isn't working for you."
Yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I mean, I think so. And then I'll pivot it to the positive side.
Yeah.
So in that point, what I really found, what was working for me is, again, I went back to sports.
Okay.
Because with the high intense schedule, I wasn't just taking the time off for myself, for my mental health, for my physical health, and just having that recharge moment, right? So I went back to sports. I took some time off, but in that time I rejoined the gym, high intensity training, got back into kickboxing. Man, like punching
Wow.
that bag, oh, it's just, I highly, anybody who's in high stress job, I highly recommend boxing, kickboxing. If you really want to take it aggressively, you can put the people's pictures on there. You can dream scenarios.
I've changed
But
my mind
it's
now. I'm not playing basketball with you anymore, Lala. Just let you know now. Manage
uh,
expectations.
they're all good.
This,
It's incredible. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. And that's one of the things that I've done in the last 5 years. I now have a routine. Like, whether people are like, oh, why are you up at 5 a.m. getting up to exercise? Because I'm like, that's the only time I can actually exercise, because I have young kids,
right.
and with the job and everything else. But that is my moment. As much as I complain and I'm half asleep at 5 a.m. in the morning,
That's your
it
time.
just sets my day up. It sets me up. I can daydream. I can work out my aggressions, and I'm ready for the day. And that is one thing that I've learned through the experience, that I was cheating myself. I was cheating myself. Like, there was this piece that I really needed to keep going. And I decided to give it 200% to my job, and not spend enough time on myself. I won't ever do that again.
So you've really had to work out as you go what works for you from
Mhm.
a health and a mental health and a vitality, a motivation perspective. Now that you're also a leader of others, and you have been, as you say, for a number of years now. At 30, you were working with a global team. From a leadership perspective, now, what are some of your thoughts or tips for other leaders who are listening to this in relation to, hopefully, we're coming out of a global pandemic. We're not really sure what's coming towards us, and people's perceptions of what makes them happy, and the future of work, and so many question marks over this. What are you thinking as a leader, or hoping as a leader, that you can do for other people to help guide and support them?
Well, I'm hoping we can have, open and trustworthy conversations, right? I
Yeah.
think people should trust in their community to be able to be open, right? I can't help if nobody asks for help, right? Take my previous example that I just talked about. Nobody knew what I was going through.
Right.
So, and it's a hard subject to just sort of assume, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you don't ask for help, it's hard to give help. um, I think so. Open conversation, I think, is one. I think people also should work, now that we all had the challenges of working from home for over a year, right?
Yeah.
I think we can all agree working from home is not a vacation.
No.
But for certain segments of the population, if you want to be very specific, it it enables them to be more productive because they're not wasting their time commuting,
No. I agree.
and it gives them more family time that maybe their happiness for their mental health, because now they just don't have to commute, or they don't have to just stay in the office for FaceTime. They can just be at home. So I think, you know and I know there's a lot of debate on this, and there's a strong belief that certain jobs in our field can only be done from the office.
Right.
I kind of shrug my shoulders. There should be a way where we can all meet in the middle. I think it should be individualistic solutions, and I think business should keep an open mind, because I think mental health is so critical. And why would you? I mean, you want happy employees, right? Especially in financial services, where you're not really creating widgets. All we have is people. So you got to keep your people engaged and happy. So to me, that mental health piece is just absolutely critical. And that could be in anything, right? For me, it's exercise, family. For somebody
Yeah.
else, it could be something else. But financial services it's such an interesting industry, because it solves sometimes the most complex problems in the world. But when it comes down to people, we just somehow stick to this notion that everybody should be office. No, not really.
Well, many of those norms, I think, have been broken now over the last 12 to 14 months, without a shadow of a doubt. And I know what you're describing as well, and I'm passionate about this. I'm just about to write an article with a dear friend. We're talking about culture of inclusivity, the inclusive leader, and human-centered leadership. I know you're also passionate about making sure there is a culture of inclusivity. You had your challenges where you were wondering, how can I be included? How do I feel part of something? And now you're in a position to do something about it, aren't you? And promote yourself a culture of inclusivity, so we get that diversity and that diversity of thought.
I'm certainly trying, and look, kudos to my employers as well, who have given me the chance and the opportunity, right? Because even when you want to contribute, it all comes down to somebody willing to include you in the effort, right?
Yeah.
This is all a circle and a circle and a circle. But I think there are a whole host of things we can do. I mean, I think we should all share information, right? What company X is doing, what they're succeeding on. There's no reason why another company can't have a conversation and see what policies work for them that could be retrofitted and can work for them.
Yep.
So I think information sharing should certainly accelerate, and that should be an inclusive process.
Yeah, best practice, lessons learned, or sharing lessons learned.
And especially for the smaller firms, right? I mean, large firms always lead the charge, but some of the smaller firms, they don't have the resources. So to bring them along, right? I think it's critical, and I think that's very important. And I think from a broadly speaking D&I perspective, there are a lot of good efforts. And what I'm trying to talk about, like, lessons learned before, right? So I'm going to go back to an old previous conversation we had.
Yeah.
One of the mistakes that I did actually is, when I was picking my mentors, I always picked people like me.
Right.
And I think that was a colossal mistake. Not because my mentors were bad. They were phenomenal. But they were the same. They struggle with the same exact challenges that I struggle with. So in reality, actually, it didn't help solve the challenges that I was trying to overcome.
Okay.
And that's a mistake I did. So if anybody is thinking about, mentors and sponsors, I highly encourage you, like, look for complementary skill set, and look for the other side, other perspective, as much as you try to look for people who are like you.
I mean, that's so relevant to the workplace as well, isn't it? Because I remember one of my guests said that interpersonal comfort trumps organizational change, where we try and find people, not through mischief, we just find people who look like us, sound like us, think like us, feel like us, and then we're comfortable. But we've lacked that diversity of thought, and the people who have polar opposite opinions who can help us thrive and see things very, very differently. I mean, that's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's just, and I know it sounds so common sense now, but it didn't occur to me at the time, right? I was so thrilled to have these mentors who are senior, who are willing to spend time with me, right? I just got lost in the, I guess, in the joy of that without actually taking a step back and just thinking about what are the challenges I'm trying to solve, and how can I solve them? I think so. Here's the mistake I did in conceptual terms. I think I didn't look at the mentorship relationship as if I'm solving a business problem.
Right.
I looked at it, I think, from a lot of a personal relationship, personal comfort. Whereas what I should have been solving was the business side, and I totally didn't.
See, these are all really powerful lessons learned, and it's interesting how you've amalgamated these, and actually through these conversations, they're now coming to the surface. I've got a final question actually for you, because this has been great, and I hope you've enjoyed this chat as well. With everything that we've talked about, what would be your best advice to a 21-year-old Lale now, with what you know? Your best advice to a 21-year-old self. So you got to pick the best now.
I wouldn't change a single thing of what I've done and where I failed. I really wouldn't change it. And look, and let's put it in context, right? For people who look at my profile, I'm exceptionally privileged, right? I may be gay. I'm gay, but I'm white. I went to Ivy League schools. I worked at brand name firms. I'm exceptionally privileged. So
Right.
I don't want anybody to think that I had my challenges, but probably does not compare to some of the challenges that other people are going.
Okay.
But I would not change a single thing. It really taught me just life just goes on. You just gotta pick it up and figure out a different way and ask for help. I mean, I've just, in building that community, that support system is just critical. You can't just do it on your own. And I think that's probably one lesson I would tell you now that I think about it, just telling myself that you can't do it on your own, right?
No,
and I'll give you one last example. I know we
No,
overran,
do.
but so when I first came to college and I went to Mount Holyoke College, my first year was my hardest year.
Okay.
Because basketball was my religion. I mean, everything, I just put so much effort into it. And my coach was so hard on me. And he actually kept me on the bench because I was so stubborn. And I had this mantra that I can do it all. And it's always my way or the highway. And that's
Right.
how I came this far. And now that I go back and I think about it, the lesson that he taught me was just, I think the analogy I can use is if you think about like a bone that was broken and healed, but healed the wrong way, he sort of had to break the bone so that it can heal in the right way. And that breakage was so hard because I took it so personally. That 1 year, that struggling with just that negative feedback. Nope, that what you're doing is wrong on the court. You can't do that. And that, it was another lesson what I learned which was, I can certainly do it, but A, ask for help, B, ask for guidance, and C, just be open to changing and adapting.
Gotcha.
And sometimes I forget about it, but I think you can't just do it all alone. Your mental resilience is critical. It's important, but you gotta ask for help.
No, I think that's great advice. And you're right. Life goes on, doesn't it? Especially when we've got kids. It just has to. So in many ways, this has been a wonderful, a timely, a pertinent, and I think it's an episode that's going to resonate with many, many people. So Lale, I just want to say a massive thank you to you for taking the time out. I know you're in New York City at the moment, so I want you to stay safe there as well. But I just want to say a massive thank you. I hope you've enjoyed being a guest on the Leadership Enigma.
Loved it. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Join us again next week for more tips and strategies on the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show, as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with your host on LinkedIn or visit the dedicated website, www.leadersenigma.com, powered by Transform Performance International. where you can access our exclusive learning, including books, videos, bonus content, assessments, and more. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.